Cool. I appreciate everybody coming. I wanted to test this out, the thought process that you can take people from different backgrounds, put them in a table, and just have a discussion and actually capture the discussion, have it a little bit more organic than what we've previously seen maybe on, say, YouTube through podcasts or whatever. So we have a list of topics that I wanted to cover. I kind of shouted out to everyone. I want to do this again with a list of topics where you guys haven't already prepped or thought about it. But yeah, so Chris is going to moderate as best he can between all you animals, and we're just going to go from there.
All right, first topic that we came up with: skills and principle-based training versus self-defense. Anybody in particular want to jump right in and grab hold of that?
This is Brian's favorite topic.
Yeah. For us, self-defense is a marketing term. And I get why it's used. It's something that people are familiar with. They understand. And for the most part, it's what people think they want. They think they want to be able to defend themselves with a few basic moves, and I think in a lot of cases do it without actually hurting somebody else. And the term that we tend to use is fighting, which has a connotation that I think most people don't like. It seems more confrontational, more aggressive, but the thing that we say pretty regularly is, I don't ever remember seeing somebody self-defense themselves.
Right.
You see humans fight. There's some initial kind of interaction, kind of that pre-contact stage where maybe there's an opportunity to just leave. Maybe there's an opportunity to de-escalate. Maybe there's an opportunity to be first, to preempt, before we get to the point of guy's hands are around my throat, or he's punching me, or he's taking me down, or whatever. But if we fail at all that, then ultimately we have to be able to just fight. We have to do more damage to the other person than they do to me. And so while I understand why people use the term self-defense, and we use it too from a marketing standpoint, I don't think it's truly representative of what happens or what should happen in a training environment.
There's a public perception too that self-defense is, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's an attack, here's no solution. I know that's what we see a lot when groups come to ask for self-defense. They expect to see, somebody grabs my hair, I do this. Somebody puts their hands on my throat, I do this. But that's such a small part of what self-defense is that if, you're focused just on those kinds of things, you're missing the actual part of it, the skills, the principles.
And if we identify 100 different problems and I give you 100 solutions, one for every problem, one, you're never going to remember it. That's just not the way people work, especially under stress when you're adrenalized or whatever. But two, almost for sure, you're going to get the 101st problem, And so if it's not based on principles and concepts, and I don't have the ability to work outside of whatever kind of that framework is that I've been given, then once it is outside of that, the guy doesn't react the way that I was told he would, or he gives a slightly different attack than I was shown or whatever, then I don't have the ability as a defender, as a practitioner, as a fighter to make decisions in real time and deal with the dynamics of violence as it changes, which it inevitably does.
Yeah, that falls into for every tactic or technique that you have, I can create a scenario that will defeat it. You want to make sure that everything kind of applies in a systematic way that you can think through the topics. The questions that start to come up is word use and the definition of the word defense. And as we start looking at that, there are a number of scenarios, even if it's just using this as a principle, that can be avoided if you are offensive, or use another word for offense. Any type of thought process that you're doing an action that's preventative. The difference between preventative medicine and actual medicine. Like there is an ability to make yourself healthy enough that you don't have to worry about, as much down the line something. Whereas if you ignore certain things, you can become truly unhealthy because you didn't do those preventative things. In the same thought process, self-defense falls into that category because it makes it so that, one, it's self. That means that your family, your loved ones, those that are around you are not included in that if you really want to get technical. And then it's defensive. Defensive means that I'm waiting for something. And the idea that you should defend something is arbitrary there, but the majority of the people that I know that are amazing at what they do, it's a full spectrum thing. It's a lifestyle. So if you were not going to use self-defense, what words would you use?
Well, again, speaking for us, we use the term self-protection and we use self-fighting. Self-protection being more proactive. Because like you said, self-defense is, it's already a thing happening to me. I'm already being choked, I'm already being punched, I'm already being tackled, whatever. And my general thought process and mindset is, if I'm reacting to you, I'm losing.
Right.
As long as you are going first, I'm going second, I'm losing. And so self-protection would be more proactive. I'm smart about where I park my car. I'm paying attention to who comes in the door. I watch their body language. I walk out to my car. I see some dudes hanging around my car that I'm not feeling all that great about. So I turn around and go back inside, as opposed to ignoring that and just pushing it because I'm Ryan Hoover and I can do, whatever. Which I think in most cases, honestly, if we talk about self-protection, when it comes to interpersonal violence, I think especially with men, probably 80-90% of the time it could be avoided altogether if you were just willing to let your ego go.
Well, yeah, that falls into another topic of discussion, which is what's the difference between a real bad guy and just some person that's off on their luck, or somebody that's irritated that you should have handled a little bit better, therefore they no longer become an adversary. The difference between somebody that is kicking in your door and causing issues, or somebody that shows up to rape your wife while you were gone that has been planning this for 4 months. That's not the same thing as me bumping into somebody in the mall and, their wife just cheated on them, therefore they want to, throw down. Like, those are differences in your adversaries. And most of the time you can talk your way out of it. But I'm pretty positive that the majority of those that train should be focusing on the real bad guy, the one that you cannot avoid by just, making smart decisions in the majority of that space.
I agree with you, but how many self-defense systems do you think approach it with that mindset, that mentality?
Well, of course not. But I don't compare. That's why I don't do that. But I'm not comparing that. I'm not critiquing other people's programs. It's one of those things that is a mindset. I don't compare myself to the person that I know that I've already progressed past.
Right, but if you're somebody that's watching this video at home, that they have a connotation of what a self-defense program or system looks like. They don't have your experience.
Right.
They haven't been exposed to things like other people at this table have been. They have a mindset of, well, self-defense looks like this.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you don't have the experience of some people at this table, then you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And it's easy to get drawn into that kind of a mindset, that kind of mentality where, well, they do a thing, I do a thing back to them.
Right.
As opposed to they do a thing that I literally could just walk away from.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's self-defense programs tend to fall really close to martial arts programs. And I understand everybody has their own definition of, say, combatives and close combat and self-defense and personal protection, all this other stuff. But for the most part, I differentiate between something that has to be taught now that yields an immediate result because of the amount of violence or the direct focus to it and something that is artistic. The thought process of art is kind of like the study of science. Like it is something that you are seeking over a large amount of time. So I don't care how well you teach an armbar. You are not going to pull off an armbar for a very, very long time and many, many, many hours dedicated to it. The thing is that you can pull off real combative techniques where if somebody were to snatch you up, pick you off the ground, and you pull a knife out and stick them in the eye, that's going to work the moment that I teach it to you, and it's going to work the moment that you leave that door. Now, whether or not you agree with that being the response doesn't matter. The thing is, it works immediately. And the thing is that there's a difference between skill sets that you pass on to someone because you want it to be peaceful or accepted, and you also have this long-term desire to train them. I always want to train or have somebody set on a path that they can focus on, but it's like somebody that goes, "Hey, I want to lose weight." I can get you to lose weight very quickly, and it's probably not that healthy.
Stop eating.
Cut off your head, you lose 20 pounds. Or I can get you to completely revamp your entire life, which is a long-term process. It is much easier to do hard-hitting, big movements first, and then slowly transition somebody into a lifestyle instead of going, "Hey, this is your next meal plan for the next 6 months." You're going to fail that. The thought process for this is, "Hey, what can I teach someone that's afraid that their daughter is going to college," right? She's not going to train. She's not going to do anything. And then the idea that this is not going to be a fight. Like, I don't want students that are learning combatives to fight with someone else. I want someone to have the confidence later on when they have the skills that they can fight. But the thing is that the majority of violent scenarios that have passed on and are personal have ended very, very quickly because one person upgraded much faster than the other person and ended it. And so that level of violence needs to be introduced right away. But that's a different type of mindset. Like you said, it's because of who I train, where I've been, my experience. And I understand that there are people that are walking around that if I tried to play with, it's disrespect. And by disrespecting them, by the time I realize they are who they are, I'm dead. There's no two ways about it. The more skill that I gain, the more I realize how quickly somebody could kill me. And the thing is that that's why you do what you can do to make somebody better as a person so that they are talking their way out of everything. They are making the right decisions. They, in turn, are not posing a threat. You do all this other pre-stuff that you guys were talking about. But at the same time, I understand that the majority of any altercations that, soft guys will get into have to end very quickly. And the same thing that I believe that smaller individuals will as well, such as females, your children, and for any badasses that get hurt, right? So like if you twist your ankle, twist your knee, you're hobbling around, two guys get in front of you, you better pull out some extremely violent, nasty shit to get rid of those people, even though in the real world, you'd be able to just mess around with those people. There's too many scenarios where the thought process of real combatives should fall in. And then anytime that you can play or use those skills, apply there. And I don't know if people understand that you should seek both. You should be very proficient in both if you have enough time. But most of the times, if you want a long-term standing program, you want to do the way that you were speaking on, which is the right way to do it. I mean, if you really look at those that are amazing at this skill set, there is some sort of combative sport segment to it. They have studied for years and years and years and years in something, if not all, ranges. But that doesn't mean that you can't be super successful in a hip pocket type thought process. But it takes a very specific individual to pass that information on. I don't think that's a martial art. I don't think it's self-defense. I think it's some psychotic person that through reputation you would go see and receive those skills.
A lot of times just self-defense, really, if you go to a self-defense class, they generally teach you techniques. And it's kind of plug and play. Like if they attack you this way, this is your response. Anybody that's been in a dynamic, real-life violent scenario knows that's not how that scenario plays out.
Yeah.
It can teach you techniques, but if you don't understand the principles behind those techniques, then you don't understand that technique to begin with. If you can't adapt in the middle of someone thrashing around while you're trying to put them in an armbar, if you only know the technique, that's not going to work. If you understand the principle behind the technique, you know, where you're putting leverage on the human body, you know how to adjust your body to accomplish that principle and make it work in that situation. Going back to, you know, you have your violent person that's kicking in your door in the middle of the night that's there to kill you or there to rape your wife or do something extremely violent, as opposed to bumping into somebody in a bar. I think if you train to deal with that person at a 10, you can always bring it back down to a 4 and de-escalate. You know, it goes back to the whole, like, your body can't go where your mind's never been. You know, if you've never planned for, if you've trained to a 4 and 10 happens to you, you're not going to 10.
Right.
If you've trained to 10, you can bring it back down to 4.
I think saying training to 10 is important though, as opposed to just training at 10. Right? If we start at 10 and stay at 10, then you bump into that dude in the bar and all you got's 10.
Right.
You know, there's levels to this stuff.
Right.
There's a progression. It's if all I've got is a hammer, everything I see is a nail kind of thing. You know.
No, that is true through and through. The question that I would have is which one should be taught first and which one should be taught second. And you know, like if you agree that you should teach at all levels, then the question is there a hindrance on going in one direction backwards, or is there a hindrance in going the other direction, or is there a faster way to teach that? Like, do you have psychological issues, like ramifications, meaning you can't upgrade as quickly or you can't downgrade as quickly? Which one's faster? Rules or regulations? Like, obviously, I have a trained military. Like, it's an easier one for me to kind of like fall back on, but you know, that's the question I would have if we agree that you should.
Well, coming from a law enforcement background, generally we've gone away from the whole use of force continuum because that had, especially newer people that didn't truly understand, think that I had to do command presence, empty hands, pepper spray, taser, and work your way up. You may need to go straight to firearm, you know, straight to deadly force. That's why I believe a lot of self-defense, if you're going to teach a self-defense course, you should at least give like a baseline legal brief on what you can and can't do in certain scenarios. You know, if somebody comes out and says like, hey, you're ugly, and you stab them in the eye with a pencil, you're probably going to jail. You know, but if the person comes up and grabs you by the throat and starts choking you and you shove a pencil in their eye, perfectly legal.
That comes down to understanding your audience too.
Right.
Because it's going to be very different teaching a group, you know, law enforcement versus like I'm going to teach a group of Girl Scouts next week. Like that's a very different communication.
Right.
For women, I don't know any single woman that hasn't been unnerved by a guy coming up to her in a parking lot asking for something, anything. And so the likelihood of having to experience that and knowing how to manage that and control internal variables as well as just navigate the situation is different group to group.
Jimmy, having been face to face with, I'm guessing, thousands of victims of violent crime, what would you say is a common theme that they could have used to de-escalate, deter, or avoid certain situations? Is there anything? I'm sure there's a common theme.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things is, in hindsight, they always saw it coming. I'll start talking to them, and
There was something about
Right.
him, or there
Yeah.
was something. Yeah.
and I'll go back through it, and they will tell me that, if we really go back and like do a deep dive into what they saw and how they ended up in that situation, they'll tell me like 10, 15 things where they were like, I didn't like it when he did this, and then I got really nervous when he did this, and I could see it was going bad, but I still didn't say or do anything to change the situation. And there was a progression where they knew, very early in the interaction that it was starting to go bad, but didn't do anything to change the situation. A lot of it's just in society, you're taught to be polite.
Yep.
Don't be rude to people. Don't yell at people. Don't tell people I don't want to talk to you. Or leave me alone, go away. Don't put your hands up in people's faces.
Especially in the South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're
Especially in
talking.
the South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be
So we're-
courteous to everyone,
Right.
friendly to no one.
Right.
Is one of the kind of based bullet points that,
Right.
that I was told.
Yeah. So one thing I teach, just kind of like a personal rule, I don't let people I don't know get within 2 arms distance if they're approaching me and talking to me. Obviously, if you're walking through a mall, you're going to get that close to people. But once I see that somebody's trying to get close to me, my first thought is, why are you trying to get close to me? Are you like a legit teenager trying to sell me your rap CD, or are you just trying to get close enough to me to attack me?
I think that too goes back to the base level self-defense courses and YouTube videos and everything that's out there nowadays. Is they teach what you were saying, that crawl, walk, run phase
Right.
of step by step by step, and they don't kind of jump the steps
Right.
because they're like, well, are my students really catching on? But then also with that, once they get done with the steps, they don't really talk about the situational awareness and everything else, which I know we're going to dive into a lot more. But it's like all those clues that you're talking about. Well, what could you have done with those clues to move into that self-defense continuum and being like, well, I don't just have to shout, show, shove, shoot, as people say. I can just go straight to shoot and just be done with it. So
Right. That's yeah, you're right. That's a great segue into topic 2. Does anybody all have anything else they want to drop on number 1? Okay.
Well, the only thing I would say is Mike said something. Like if I take this pen right here and I lay it on the table, I think this table is full of people that have had different levels of experience in real world conflict, fighting, war, whatever. And I think everybody would agree if any of us got stuck in the eye with that, it would probably
Tickle.
yeah, it would probably have an effect, right? It would be game changing. That act in and of itself is relatively easy to do. It takes very little skill, just take this, poke it in somebody's eye. You could teach this to anyone. That's not the hard part. The hard part is taking that person that needs that and getting them
To do it.
to do it.
And
To the mindset I will take this pen and stab it in your fucking eye to get you off of me. And the people that need that mindset are the least likely ones to have it. So I think that's the hard. It's not the. What you're saying makes perfect sense to me. If we could jump straight to, all right, I've got 2 hours with this girl that's going off to college, and I know that in 2 hours I can't teach her how to wrestle, how to box, how to do kickboxing, how to get up off the ground. But I can teach her to stab somebody in the face with a pen. The hard part of it's going to be getting her to the point where she actually would do that.
Which kind of goes back, me and Mike have discussed this before. He brings up the fact that if we start with, hey, I'm going to grab this pen and shove it in your eye, now when I tell you palm strike them and run away, that's way easier for you to digest, as opposed to if I start with, okay, I'm going to palm strike this guy, I may need to stab you in the eye first. That may be the appropriate response at that time.
By the way, I never teach palm striking.
I think it's easier to start high and come down, just because you set the bar here, and then you're like, but there's all these other levels where you can adjust, depending on each scenario. Like you say, it depends. I use that all the time too. People are like, what do you do in this situation? I'm like, it really depends. Like, I can give you the same set of circumstances, and it's going to depend. Between 10 different people, you'll get 10 different responses that are appropriate.
That's a good green flag on a self-defense instructor. Somebody
Right.
who isn't just quick to be like, oh, someone does that, okay, you do this.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, like there's variables and they matter, and you can't just ignore
Give me
them.
more context. Like,
Yeah.
where are you?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, truly, you need to know more about the person that is asking the question. You need to understand more about their life. You need to know a little bit more about their background, the variables that allow you to condition that person psychologically about that pen or use of that pen usually revolve around finding something of value in their life that they can hold on to, that they can truly understand and hold as the thing that is lost. You can do it as self-worth. You can do it as this person is telling you that by hurting you or hurting a loved one, they are determining that you are no longer allowed to see your loved one. You are no longer allowed to do the things you're passionate about. Get them to understand that this is not us trying to end their life because we see no value in it. It is us trying to get you to protect something of value, which is yourself or someone that you care about. You know, like everyone talks about, well, if it was my child, I would. And it's like your child will be equally affected by you allowing this person to do something to you. And in turn, you have to have your child as a catalyst for you to defend because you are attacking that child. It is the same thing in your mind. You are a person of value and you need to understand that you need to protect yourself. Every person in your life will be horrifically affected by that person being successful, and no person has the right to do that. And so usually you start with that, and then usually you move directly into what are the things that you have to understand to be able to apply that. And why am I teaching this to you? Like that's usually the start of those classes is like, why am I teaching this to you? Because if I had 10 years to work with you, I would teach a different process, but I don't. And I know that if I were to take, Jack tells a story about this where it gets played out, but I'll just simplify it. If I were to take a 10-year-old boy and have them Superman punch me in the stomach, in turn, what happens is it'll be really cute. And it doesn't matter how many years of boxing experience you give that little kid. He's not going to hit me hard enough to make me even think twice about it. But if you put a small knife in his hand and make him Superman punch me the exact same way, it is a life-altering event for me. Okay? And so the thing is that why do I teach that? One, because I need you to psychologically understand that you might have to do it. If you think about it, therefore, you start accepting that that's a possibility. You have a better chance of being able to do it. And then two, the things I'm teaching to you should make sense like that. Do I want that kid to do that? No. But the thing is that that's a difference between a strike and a weapon that is going to be a force multiplier. You know, now everything falls directly under common sense. Like, you sit there and you start working that back and forth. The thing that I did want to talk about for skills, unless somebody has a comment to that last topic, is I run into issues with the moral issue of certain lessons, right? So I talk about the fact that I don't teach self-defense, I teach skills. I teach skills that apply into your life. You can plug and play them after a certain point. But for the most part, I give you skill sets so that you can use them when most appropriate. Okay? So if I were to teach you how to, say, pick a lock, that's a skill. Skill can be applied to opening up your door when you forget your keys inside. It can also be used to wait until your neighbors are gone and pick their lock and steal all their shit. In both cases, you took the skill that I gave you and you used them. In both cases, it is not my responsibility on how you use those skills. If I teach you something like exposing a knife and stabbing it in somebody's neck, and you use it in a bar fight, that is on you. That's your character. That was your decision. I did not teach you to do it in that fashion. But if you were to pass that information on to your daughter, and for whatever reason it happened, 3 young men were to grab her, take her into a van, and then attempt to rape her, the only thing that you could teach that young girl is something that violent to try to attempt to get out of a really, really, really horrible scenario. And the thing is that in the same vein, you have the same skill, but applied in 2 different scenarios. And whether or not you believe that she should have that knife or whatever, that's not the point. The point is it's a skill. And so I struggle with me creating, or any instructor deciding the moral line that a skill should be passed on. Because the thing is that you have no idea who you're teaching, who's in your class. They may need something like that, and you had access to that information and you refused to give it to them because you didn't feel that that was right to pass on. Now, there are obviously other things that can happen, like you can give the information to the wrong person, but normally, from my experience, there are more good people that need information than bad people showing up to these groups and pulling from specialists. But that's my thing that I want to kind of throw out there is, where does that line go, and is that even a factor?
I mean, we broad base kind of legal aspects of things, and I talk about how there might be moral and ethical obligations, but it's same. It's not my responsibility to dictate what you're going to do with this information when I give it to you, because I'm giving it to you in a certain context,
Right.
and I mean for it to be used in that context. If you go and do something else with it, I don't think that's any different than if I sell you a car and you decide to run through a crowd full of people
Right.
while driving that car. That's not what that car was meant to do. Just like that's not what my lesson was meant to do.
Well, I think something that will stand out as well. Like in the end, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at a human situation, right? You found somebody who has identified a place in their life where they're lacking, and they feel that something needs to change. For some, it's, hey, I don't like how I look naked, and I want to look better come beach season. So they've identified something and want to seek change. And then what you're really trying to do is not give that person a six pack or make them look good in their bikini. You're actually trying to get them to change their life, right? So yeah, if I can get them, I'll stay on the fitness thing a little bit so I don't go off too many topics. If I can get them to eat differently and work really hard and then start recovering, and then it starts affecting how they are at home, with how they interact with their children, their significant other, because they're sleeping better, their mood's better, their life maybe just might have a better focus. You know, it's a little more intentional how they go day to day because they know, hey, tomorrow I'm going to get crushed. So maybe I don't need to eat this now or drink this now because I'm going to pay for it later. You know, maybe it changes who they're around at work. So I don't think the moral thing comes into play. The average, you'll know when it goes wrong. The guy's going to ask how to fly a plane, and when you, well, here's how we land, he goes, I don't need that. Like that's an indicator. Like it's going to be very wrong. You know, the private on the corner of, you know, a building in Afghanistan that you know shoots an old dude that startles him walking around the corner. That's a young kid being scared. You know, the guy that walks away and comes back with scalps and ears, like that's easily identified as being wrong. Like it's very obvious when it goes wrong. So the morality thing, I don't even think comes into play. And if you frame your lesson correctly, it's not going to be in the eye. Like that's a universal thing. It'll turn into something that can be applied to other aspects of their life.
Yep.
The why is what's the driving factor, not the manner in which I achieve it.
The morality thing comes up in areas that are perceived to be more violent or intimate, or both, versus more commonly accepted uses of force. For example, I go to a range and you're going to teach me how to conceal carry and how to use that in a personal protection scenario where somebody has to be stopped. Play that out however you want. So what happens is you teach me how to draw, how to get offline, how to put 3-4 rounds directly in the center of that person's chest. Okay, and I drill it, and I drill it, and I drill it. We all know at this table that not only is that going to stop them, but they're going to die. Like the fact is that internal trauma, if you hit them center mass, is going to end their life. Okay, there's no question about that. And the people that come to that class, they know that. You don't have to get all graphic with it. And then I do the same thing, but I give you a knife. And what happens is we create a similar scenario where it's most appropriate at that distance to use the knife versus the pistol. So I don't want to get into the whole, range and all this other stuff. But what I am saying is now what happens is I bury the knife into the person's forearm, cut out their arm, and then I hit them in the side of the leg so that they fall on the ground. I don't kill them. There's possibility that they could possibly bleed out. That's why you carry a tourniquet. And then in turn, what happens is there is that seems a little excessive. And then there's that moral line of going, well, how is that even a comment? You went to both classes. One, in turn, I'm definitely killing them. I possibly could kill them with a knife, but because it is close, you have that. The more foreign the class is when it comes to violence, the more often what are the legal ramifications of this? Is this a little excessive? And then the other thing is if I do that with him, it is a guy versus a guy. He's creepy looking, I'm not so much. And in turn, what happens is people see that as a one-off, right? But the thing is that I can only teach a skill by myself, right? So I can't transform into some sort of scenario where you can see context, right? If I were to do the exact same thing, and once again, maybe I'm an 18-year-old girl, and the person that I'm doing this to is a 300-pound 6'2", and he has cornered her in the bathroom, you may not see that that's excessive. But that's usually where I see the majority of it gets taken out of context, like you said, and you can shape it. But no matter how you do that, what happens is that's where people start having a problem with it. And my solution has always been that I don't even deal with that question because my line is different than your line, just like it's different than our videographer's line. I can't actually tell you what you should do because I shouldn't even make that judgment. But that is a conversation that pops up.
All you're running into is a situation where they found an aspect that they're uncomfortable with.
Right.
I ran into something really similar to this where I was teaching some stuff, and one of the guys who was an experienced individual called me over and during the class. It was like, hey, I feel like what we're doing is a little too violent. I was like, oh, okay. So we found it. We found your line. That's what we just found. This is good. This needs to get addressed for everyone. So I stopped the entire class. I pulled everyone in. And I said, ask me your question again. And he said, what I think we're doing is too violent. And go, in what way? And he goes, well, not everyone needs to be killed. 100%. So what do you do to those that need to be killed? He goes, I kill them. What do you do to those that don't? Well, I don't. And then I was well, then what's the concern? Yeah. The way things were being, he hit an internal limiter.
Mental plateau.
Yep. And we just needed to talk through it. And as soon as we got through that, he was like, oh, I am looking at this incorrectly. There's no point where we saying, hey, everyone off with their heads.
Lethal force is lethal force. There's no degrees.
That's the end of that. Yeah. It's that simple. So
I would also lean into the question that you talked about, about self-defense, programs, other people's programs. I see that a lot. I see that judgment call a lot. It's I don't believe this person or, in that scenario, she should have had whatever. The solution isn't that. And it's you're making a moral judgment or you're making a maturity judgment based off of whatever's going on in your life. And technically you are withholding information. And so that's the reason I bring it up. I bring it up a lot. It's I don't feel that you should be doing that.
Well, there's also a skill level involved with it. And that's why I was what do you need to do to win this? Right? You addressed, the more skilled you are, maybe the less amount of force you need to win the scenario or situation, whatever it is. That's why I was whatever you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling them.
Yeah, if your training increases, your 10 setting also increases.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
My 10 and Jimmy's 10 is going to be very different, right?
I'm sure you see. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes with experience. It comes with maturity, with training, and strength and confidence is no substitute for that. But when you have the level of expertise that you can convey, that's really important.
And there's thousands of body cam footage out there. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of it where you have law enforcement officers that have a decent amount of experience in training and watch them deal with the scenario, and then the new guy or the one that doesn't and how fastly how like quickly that escalates and ramps up to a level where you're like, how did we even get here? Like
Right.
that was
I
just like,
even-
like
I have a real life scenario where I showed up to 2 officers fighting with a guy, and during the fight, like as I'm walking up to help, see where I need to help, he reaches up and he's holding on to one of the officer's guns. So I grabbed his wrist, dropped my knee on his elbow, his arm broke. We handcuffed him. He went to the hospital and went to jail. No, he was alive.
he's alive.
There were a lot of questions, and my supervisors were pulling me aside, like with a lot of questions. Like, hey, that was really violent. I was like, okay, take the same scenario. If I'd walked up and put my gun to the back of his head and shot him because he was pulling that officer's gun out of his holster, would we be having this discussion right now?
It'd have been rule
It's
justified.
like we have a much
Yeah.
lower level of force used.
And that falls into a point that I have. When you're talking about the scale from 1 to 10, it is my experience, and it is I've taught military units in both ways, and I find that by doing it the other way, probably because of the amount of time that I have with them, it doesn't work that well. I find that by teaching them how to kill first, that you hit psychological barriers much faster where they have to accept things. And when you kill someone, the only goal is to do that task. Like, there is no correct way to just, obviously it can get excessive, but like, there's no correct way to accomplish that. If you need to do that, then you do that, and you do it to end that scenario.
Right.
There is a way that you can control someone improperly, and it is infinitely more dangerous and harder to do to control someone than it is to kill them, because of the rules and ramifications that you have based off of your job set and the environment that you are directly in, and the dangers that you have to think about if you don't do enough damage quickly enough because of the way they can upgrade or get to someone you love or whatever. Like, your ability or thought to try to play with that person, and I say play because technically you're running a risk by not treating them by like the most dangerous thing that's possibly you've ever encountered. And in turn, by doing so, that is a very, very hard skill to master. It's one of the reasons why when you teach control tactics, there's a lot that goes directly into that. And the thing is that you can always drop it down. Like you guys were saying, you can drop it down from that high level all the way down. I've found that if you try to do it the other way, can you do it? Yes, but a lot of times it's hard for people to actually psychologically ramp up when they think that they have an option or they played in this lower area a lot. And so...
But I think that depends on the audience, because if I'm teaching a military unit, that's very different than if I'm teaching a law firm. Like we do a lot of corporate work. Like if I'm teaching a group of office workers, because again, like why do people have a very different mindset and mentality about if I put 4 rounds in your chest versus if I take a knife and I stab you in the throat and I stab you in the femoral? Why does one make somebody squeamish and the other one is like, well, of course I would put 4 rounds in his hip? Yeah. It's the thought of it. It's the mindset. It's the mentality. There's a visceral nature to me putting my hands on you and running a piece of steel through skin and muscle and bone and tendon and getting bloody and feeling the life lead. I don't have to touch you with a pistol.
Yeah.
So I think you can take people. I'm not saying you can't do it the way you're talking about. Obviously you can. I think it's more palatable to most people to think about putting rounds in somebody's chest than it is. I'm gonna pick this up and I'm gonna stab you in the eyeball with it.
No, and I agree with you 100%. And if I wanted them to like what is being taught to them, that's how I would do it.
Right.
If I want them to have to go home and think about the things that they cannot ever unsee,
right,
I would do it in a way where they can't unsee some really graphic stuff, because that's how I need to train you psychologically. What you're talking about is what Dave Grossman speaks on. The closer that you get to the person, the harder it is psychologically to actually do that violent act. right? And so the thing is that we are now talking about getting really, really close to somebody with a knife, and it's intimate. Like there's no way to dehumanize that person unless you have already done that because of your training. Like that person is going to scream, they bleed, everything about them looks.
They're gonna bleed on you.
Yep. You know, and so like those are all things that you have to deal with. And it just depends on how much emphasis you put on the psychological part of it. Like if mindset is the most important thing, then I feel that the conditioning of their mind is something that I want to get to immediately. Now, talking about the law firm thing, I would never teach a law firm, half the stuff. You know, it's the same thing. Like I wouldn't teach.
I just said that because we had one reach out to us recently.
Yeah, I would actually love to.
You know.
I'd rather go down that route.
Yeah.
You know,
route,
you work it towards your audience, but the same scenario or you would like to do comparable, training. You know, if somebody comes up to you and they're trying to learn personal protection, it is the worst scenario. I like using females as an example just because there's a lot of things that you can't hide from. Like you can't deal with the ego and the I know how to fight and the strength and the size and like all this crap. Like it is the worst scenario she's ever going to be in. She is probably going to be completely unaware. She is not going to be prepared. He's probably stalked her for a while. If this is a real violent scenario that we normally are talking about, they are going to pick the best time to sabotage. They are going to wait in an area that they feel safe and enter. Like you just keep listing all the negatives. And then for a military person, if they're in close combat, they are not supposed to be in close combat. Normally what happens is you've done something, you miscalculated, there are more of them than you, in turn you're probably injured, people are dying, interns, the worst scenario that you possibly can be in my mind, they are very, very similar, right? And that's why I compare those. But when I deal with like law enforcement, when I deal with like a business, it's the same thing as when I deal with an officer in the military. I teach them very similar things, depends stuff and, understanding, what they can get away with, the scenarios that they can position themselves, situational awareness, which is a good segue to the next conversation.